The year I stopped drowning. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a sound that only I seemed to hear. It was a low, constant vibration that settled deep in my bones. I had been a nurse at St. Jude's Hospital for 10 years, and for 10 years, I had convinced myself that this noise was the sound of being important, of being needed. But tonight, staring at the clock, which read 3 a.m., it just sounded like a warning. I had just finished stabilizing a young man who had crashed his motorcycle on the highway. His chest was rising and falling in a rhythmic, mechanical way, aided by the machines surrounding him. I should have felt relief. I should have felt that familiar rush of adrenaline that comes from cheating death. Instead, I felt nothing. It was as if I were observing the scene from behind a thick pane of glass, watching a woman named Maya Chen perform her duties, while the real me was slowly sinking into dark, cold water. "Maya, you look pale," Dr. Evans said, pausing as he signed a chart near the nurse's station. "Why don't you take a 15-minute break? Go get some fresh air." I nodded, unable to form a complete sentence. My throat felt tight, a sensation I had become accustomed to over the last few months. "Thanks," I whispered. I walked toward the break room, but I never made it inside. My phone, buried deep in the pocket of my scrubs, began to vibrate against my leg. It was my mother. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My mother, Wei, never called at 3 a.m. In our family, emotional outbursts were considered a weakness, and emergencies were handled with quiet efficiency before anyone else was notified. If she was calling now, the world had already ended. "Maya!" Her voice was sharp, brittle like dry leaves. "It's Lily!" The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. Lily was my younger sister, my baby sister, the one person in the world who could make me laugh until my stomach hurt. She was 26, an artist, vibrant and chaotic in all the ways I was disciplined and controlled. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She took pills, Maya, too many of them." My mother's voice didn't break. It remained steady, terrifyingly calm. "She is at your hospital. The ambulance is bringing her in now." I didn't ask any more questions. I dropped the phone and ran. I ran back toward the ambulance bay, my rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. As I ran, the memories of the last few months flooded my mind. I had missed Lily's art show last week because I picked up an extra shift. I hadn't returned her text message from 3 days ago, a simple picture of a stray cat she had found. I had been too busy, too tired, too consumed by the endless cycle of saving strangers while ignoring the people who actually mattered. The ambulance doors flew open, and the paramedics wheeled the stretcher out. I saw a tangle of dark hair and a face so pale it looked translucent. I moved to help, my training taking over automatically, but a hand grabbed my shoulder. "Maya, you can't." It was the charge nurse, Sarah. "Your family. You know the protocol. You have to step back." "That's my sister," I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat. It was the loudest noise I had made in years. "I know," Sarah said softly, guiding me away. "Let us save her. You go to the waiting room." The waiting room was empty except for 2 figures, my mother and my grandmother, Nai. They sat side by side, distinct and separate, like 2 statues carved from different stones. My mother was wearing a pristine beige coat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, not a single strand out of place. She looked as though she were waiting for a business meeting, not wondering if her daughter would survive. Next to her sat Nai. She was tiny, shrinking with every passing year. She wore her usual gray cardigan and clutched her handbag with gnarled, shaking hands. Nai rarely spoke. She had survived the Cultural Revolution in China, a time of hunger and fear that she refused to discuss. She had carried her silence across the ocean to America, and that silence had trickled down through the generations, infecting us all. I walked over to them, my legs feeling heavy. "Mom, Nai." My mother looked up. Her eyes were dry. "Is she?" "The doctors are working on her," I said, falling into the plastic chair opposite them. "She is in the best hands." How could she be so selfish? My mother hissed, looking at the wall. She has everything. We gave her everything. Mom, stop, I said, rubbing my temples. I will not stop. She is weak, just like... She stopped herself, glancing quickly at Nai, but the old woman was staring at the floor, lost in her own world. She isn't weak, I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. She is in pain. There is a difference. Pain? My mother scoffed. What pain? She doesn't know what real suffering is. She didn't have to eat tree bark to survive. She didn't have to hide her talent to avoid being beaten. This was the narrative I had grown up with. My mother's disappointed dreams of becoming a concert pianist had been crushed by poverty and politics. Consequently, she had poured all that ambition into me and Lily. I had taken the safe route, becoming a nurse, a respectable, stable profession. Lily had rebelled, choosing art, choosing uncertainty. We thought she was brave. Now I realized she was just as terrified as I was. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I was 34 years old. I had a mortgage, a retirement fund, and a career. I had done everything right. I had checked every box on my mother's list. Yet, sitting in that sterile waiting room, I realized I didn't know who I was. I was a collection of other people's expectations. Suddenly, Nai reached out and placed her cold hand over mine. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with cataracts, but surprisingly sharp. Water, she whispered. It was the first English word I had heard her say in months. Do you want water, Nai? I asked gently. She shook her head. No, Lily, she is under the water. I froze. It was a strange thing to say, but it made perfect sense. I felt it too, the pressure in my chest, the inability to breathe deeply. We were all drowning. Lily had just stopped fighting the current. I need to see her, I said, standing up. I don't care about the protocol. Maya, sit down, my mother commanded. Do not cause a scene. A scene? I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. My sister tried to kill herself, and you are worried about a scene? For the first time in my life, I didn't sit down. I turned my back on my mother's shocked expression and walked toward the double doors of the ICU. I had spent my life following the rules, keeping the peace, and staying silent. But as I pushed through those heavy doors, I knew that the silence was killing us. Inside the unit, the lights were dimmed. I found Lily's room. She was hooked up to a ventilator, the rhythmic hissing of the machine filling the small space. She looked so young, her face relaxed, stripped of the heavy makeup she usually wore to hide her fatigue. I pulled a chair close to the bed and took her limp hand. Her skin was cool. I'm here, Lil, I whispered, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I was so busy trying to keep my head above water that I didn't notice you were already sinking. I squeezed her hand, hoping for a response, a twitch, anything. There was nothing. But as I sat there, listening to the monitor beep, a memory surfaced, not from the recent past, but from years ago. A memory of a piano, a hidden letter, and a secret that I had promised never to tell. The memory took me back to a rainy Tuesday when I was 12 years old. My father was at work, and Lily was just a toddler sleeping in her crib. I had come home early from school because of a stomachache. The house was usually silent, a kind of heavy silence that felt like holding your breath. But that day, the house was alive. A melody drifted down from the attic. It was fast, furious, and incredibly sad. I had crept up the stairs, the wood groaning softly under my weight. The attic door was slightly open. Inside, surrounded by boxes of old clothes and dusty furniture, sat my mother. She was hunched over an old, battered keyboard I had never seen before. Her fingers moved like hummingbirds, a blur of motion. Her eyes were closed, and tears were streaming down her face. She wasn't the strict, cold woman who checked my homework with a red pen. She was passionate. She was free. I watched her for 10 minutes, mesmerized. Then the floorboard creaked. My mother stopped instantly. The music died. She spun around, her face hardening into a mask of stone. She stood up, wiped her tears, and unplugged the keyboard. "Forget you saw this, Maya," she had said, her voice low. "Music is a ghost. It haunts you, but it cannot feed you. You will study science. You will have a real life." I never saw the keyboard again. I learned later that she had thrown it in the dumpster that very afternoon. That was the secret I kept. My mother wasn't heartless. She was heartbroken. She had killed the best part of herself so that she could survive, and she expected us to do the same. The beep of the heart monitor brought me back to their present. I squeezed Lily's hand again, and this time, her fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered, opening slowly to reveal groggy, confused eyes. "Maya," she croaked. Her voice was dry and scratchy. "I'm here, Lil. I'm right here," I said, leaning in close. "You're safe." She looked around the room, the panic rising in her eyes as the reality of where she was settled in. Did I mess up?" "No, you didn't mess up," I soothed her, brushing hair off her forehead. "You just needed rest." The door opened, and my mother walked in, followed slowly by Nai. My mother's relief was visible for exactly 1 second before she stiffened, her posture correcting itself into that familiar rigid line. "You are awake," my mother said. She didn't hug Lily. She walked to the foot of the bed and inspected the charts. "The doctor said you will be physically fine. They want to keep you for observation." "Hi, Mom," Lily whispered, turning her head away. "Why, Lily?" my mother asked, her tone not angry but exhausted. "We paid for the art classes. We let you live in the city. We supported your hobbies. Was it not enough?" "It's not about the money, Mom," Lily said, a tear sliding into her ear. "I just feel empty, like I'm never good enough." "Empty?" My mother laughed humorlessly. "You have a full belly. You have a roof. You have safety. Do you know what empty is? Empty is watching your neighbors disappear in the night. Empty is silence, because speaking gets you killed." "Mom, stop," I interrupted, standing up. "She just woke up. She doesn't need a history lesson. She needs love." My mother turned to me, her eyes blazing. "I give her love by making sure she survives. You think love is hugs and soft words? Love is sacrifice. Love is doing what is necessary, even if it hurts." Nai, who had been standing quietly by the door, suddenly made a noise. It was a low moan, a sound of deep distress. She was staring at the ventilator machine next to Lily's bed, her eyes wide with terror. "The Red Guards," Nai whispered in Mandarin, shaking her head violently. "They are coming. Hide the books. Hide the piano." Nai, it's okay," I said, moving toward her. "You're at the hospital." "No," Nai shouted, surprisingly loud. She pointed at my mother. You played. I told you not to play. They will hear you." My mother froze. The color drained from her face. It was the first time I had ever seen her look truly afraid. "Mama, quiet," my mother said in Mandarin, her voice trembling. "That was 50 years ago. It is over." "It is never over," Nai cried, clutching her chest. "They took the piano. They took your father. Because of the music. Always the music." The room fell into a stunned silence. I looked from Nai to my mother. I knew my grandfather had died when my mother was young, but I had been told it was an illness. I never knew he was taken. I never knew that my mother's music was the reason. My mother turned away from us, walking to the window to stare out at the parking lot. Her shoulders were shaking. The invincible Wei Chen was crumbling. "Is that true?" I asked my mother's back. "Is that why you hate the music? Because you think it killed him?" My mother didn't answer for a long time. When she turned back, her face was wet, but her expression was resigned. "He loved to hear me play. He was a professor, but he loved Western classical music. It was forbidden during the Cultural Revolution. He made me practice in the basement with blankets over the windows. But one day, the neighbors heard. They reported us." She took a deep breath, the air shuddering in her lungs. They came that night. They smashed the piano. They beat him in the street. He died in a labor camp 3 months later. I was 7 years old. She looked at Lily, then at me. I promised myself I would never let anything dangerous into our lives again. Art, music, passion. These things are dangerous. They attract attention. Safety is the only thing that matters. I looked at Lily. She was crying silently, watching our mother with a mixture of horror and understanding. For the first time, I understood. My mother wasn't trying to control us because she was mean. She was trying to protect us from a trauma she had never healed from. She was building a fortress around us, brick by brick, not realizing that she was walling us in with her own ghosts. "Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm, "we are not in China in 1966. We are safe here, but you are killing us with this safety. Lily almost died because she felt she couldn't breathe in this fortress you built." "I did my best," my mother whispered, sounding like a small child. "I know," I said, "but it's time to stop drowning." I walked over to the chair where I had left my bag. I needed air. The room was too small for 3 generations of pain. "I'm going to get coffee. Does anyone want anything?" No one answered. I stepped out into the hallway, the sterile air filling my lungs. I walked toward the elevator, but instead of going to the cafeteria, I pressed the button for the roof. The night air was cold and biting. I walked to the edge of the roof and looked out at the city lights. Millions of people, millions of stories. I thought about my own life. I was a nurse because it was safe. I was single because relationships were unpredictable. I lived in a beige apartment because it was practical. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper I had found in Lily's bag earlier, before she woke up. It was a sketch. It showed 3 women standing in a boat. The boat was sinking. The oldest woman was looking back. The middle woman was rowing frantically against the current. The youngest woman was jumping into the water. Underneath the drawing, Lily had written one sentence: "Who will save the rower?" I stared at the image. I was the rower. I was the one exhausting myself trying to keep the family afloat, trying to please my mother while protecting my sister. But in doing so, I had forgotten how to swim for myself. I realized then that saving Lily wasn't just about getting her therapy or medication. It was about breaking the cycle. It was about showing her, and my mother, that it was possible to live without fear. But to do that, I had to change my own life. I had to stop rowing and start steering. The vibration of my phone broke my trance. It was a notification from the hospital scheduling system. Shift added. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. I looked at the screen. Then, with a shaking hand, I pressed decline. It was a small thing, a tiny rebellion. But as the screen went dark, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was possibility. I turned back toward the door. I had to go back down there. I had to help my family navigate these waters. But this time, I wasn't going to let the current decide where we went. I walked back into the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic hitting me harder than before. The dynamic in the room had shifted. My mother was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hand resting awkwardly on Lily's knee. Nai was asleep in the corner chair, exhausted by her outburst. "I declined the shift," I announced, my voice steady. My mother looked up, her eyebrows knitting together. "You what?" "I'm not going to work tomorrow, or the next day," I said, walking over to the other side of the bed. "I'm taking a leave of absence. We need to figure this out. We need to talk about Dad, about the piano, about everything." My mother opened her mouth to argue, to tell me about responsibility and bills, but she looked at Lily's pale face and stopped. She sighed, a long, deflationary sound. "Okay," she whispered, "okay." The recovery was not a straight line. It was a messy, tangled path full of setbacks and silence. Lily moved into my apartment for a while because she didn't want to be alone. And surprisingly, my mother didn't object. For the first few weeks, we walked on eggshells. We were polite, careful, and terrified of breaking the fragile peace we had established. However, The truth, once spoken, could not be put back in the box. We started having dinner together every Sunday. Not the formal, stiff dinners of my childhood, but chaotic ones with takeout boxes and unfinished conversations. One evening, over Thai noodles, I asked my mother about the music again. "Did you ever play again? After you came to America?" I asked. My mother put down her fork. She looked out the window at the rain falling on the street. "Once," she admitted, "when you were a baby. I found a piano in a church basement. I played a lullaby. But my hands, they shook too much. The fear was in my fingers." She looked at me, her eyes sad but clear. "I didn't want you to have shaking hands, Maya. I wanted you to have strong hands, surgeon's hands." "I have nurse's hands," I corrected her gently, "and they are strong. But Mom, they are also tired." That was the night I finally admitted the truth to myself. I was a good nurse, yes. I was competent, reliable, and skilled. But I didn't love it. I didn't love the adrenaline, or the trauma, or the constant proximity to death. I had chosen it because it was the opposite of my mother's dangerous art. It was essential. It was practical. It was safe. But safety was suffocating me. 2 months after Lily's hospitalization, I found myself sitting in the office of the hospital administrator. The resignation letter in my hand felt heavy, like a stone, but also hot, like a coal. "Are you sure about this, Maya?" Dr. Evans asked, leaning back in his chair. "You are on track for a promotion. You have tenure." "I'm sure," I said. The fear was there, pounding in my chest, screaming that I was making a mistake, that I would end up homeless and regretful. But underneath the fear was a tiny, quiet hum of excitement. "I need to find out who I am when I'm not saving everyone else," I explained. I walked out of the hospital into the bright spring sunshine. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. I pulled my phone out and dialed Lily. "I did it," I said. "You quit?" Lily shrieked on the other end. "Oh my God, Maya, I'm so proud of you. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go to the travel agency," I said, laughing. It was a real laugh, loose and unforced. "And then I'm going to write? I used to love writing stories before I decided it was a waste of time. I'm going to write about us, about Nai. The final step was telling my mother. I drove to her house, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. She was in the garden, pruning her rose bushes with ruthless efficiency. She watched me approach, wiping her hands on her apron. "I quit my job today, Mom," I said, deciding to rip the bandage off quickly. She stopped. The shears clicked shut. She looked at me for a long, agonizing minute. I prepared myself for the lecture, for the disappointment, for the accusation that I was throwing my life away. "You are 34, she said finally. "You are not a child." "No, I'm not." She looked at her roses. "When I was 34, I was working 2 jobs cleaning houses so you could have piano lessons that you hated. I didn't have a choice." She turned back to me. "You have a choice. That is what I worked for. That is the success." I stared at her, stunned. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a declaration of pride. But it was permission. In her own pragmatic, guarded way, she was telling me that I was free. The debt was paid. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. "Just have insurance," she added sternly, pointing the shears at me. "And call your grandmother. She misses you." The following week, the 3 of us, Mom, Lily, and I, took Nai to the beach. It was a gray, windy day, the kind of weather that keeps most people away. But Nai wanted to see the ocean. We wheeled her chair down to the hard-packed sand near the water's edge. The Atlantic Ocean was vast and restless, waves crashing against the shore in a rhythmic, eternal cycle. Lily ran toward the water, kicking off her shoes, letting the freezing foam rush over her feet. She turned back and waved, her hair whipping in the wind, looking more alive than I had seen her in years. She wasn't fixed. She still had therapy, still had bad days, but she was no longer sinking. I stood next to my mother and Nai. Nai stared at the horizon, her eyes watery. Too much water, Nai murmured. But beautiful. Yes, I said, it is. I looked at the water. For so long, I had felt like I was drowning, weighed down by the past, by expectations, by the silence of 3 generations of women who had learned to survive by holding their breath. I had spent my life as the lifeguard, terrified that if I looked away for 1 second, everything would fall apart. But looking at my sister laughing in the wind and my mother standing stoically beside me, I realized the storm had passed. I wasn't in the water anymore. I was standing on solid ground. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the salty, cold air. It was the first breath of the rest of my life. The safe life was gone, washed away by the tide. Ahead of me was the unknown, terrifying, uncertain, and absolutely wonderful. Come on, I said, taking my mother's hand. She flinched, surprised, but didn't pull away. Let's get your feet wet. Don't be ridiculous, Maya, she said, though she let me pull her toward the shoreline. I am wearing good shoes. Then take them off, I laughed. And together, we walked toward the water, not to drown, but to feel the waves. The end. Wow, what a journey for Maya and her family. I hope you enjoyed that story and found it moving. It really shows how sometimes we have to let go of who we think we should be in order to become who we are really meant to be. Now, before we wrap up, I want to take a few minutes to look at some of the more advanced vocabulary and expressions we heard in the story. These are great words to help you reach that B2 level and beyond. First, let's look at the phrase to walk on eggshells. Maya said that after Lily came home, the family walked on eggshells. Imagine trying to walk on fragile eggs without breaking them. You would have to be very careful, right? In English, when we say we are walking on eggshells, it means we are being extremely careful about what we say or do around someone because we don't want to upset them or cause any argument. It's a very stressful way to live. Another great word we saw was pragmatic. Maya described her mother as pragmatic. If someone is pragmatic, they are practical and realistic. They focus on results and facts rather than emotions or dreams. A pragmatic person solves problems in a sensible way, which is exactly how Maya's mother survived her difficult past. We also heard the word stabilizing. In the beginning, Maya was stabilizing a patient. To stabilize means to make something steady or firm so it doesn't change or fall. In a medical context, it means stopping a patient from getting worse. But we can also use it in life, like stabilizing your finances or stabilizing a shaky table. Finally, remember the phrase ripping the bandage off. Maya decided to rip the bandage off when telling her mother she quit her job. If you pull a bandage off slowly, it hurts for a long time. If you rip it off quickly, it hurts sharply, but only for a second. In conversation, this idiom means doing something difficult or painful quickly, without delaying, just to get it over with. All right, now that we have learned some new words, let's see how well you understood the story. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Here is question number 1. Why did Maya's mother, Wei, originally stop playing the piano when she was young? Question number 2. What did the water represent for Maya throughout the story? And question number 3. What did Maya find in her sister Lily's bag that made her realize she needed to change her own life? I want you to pause the video right now. Take a moment to think about your answers, or even better, practice your writing by typing them in the comments section down below. I love reading your thoughts. Go ahead, press pause. Okay, are you ready? Let's check your answers. For the first question, Maya's mother stopped playing the piano because it was dangerous during the Cultural Revolution in China. Her own father was taken away because they were reported for playing forbidden music, so she associated music with danger and trauma. For the second question, the water represented the overwhelming pressure of expectations, silence, and unhealed trauma. For most of the story, Maya felt like she was drowning in these burdens, but by the end, she learned to stand on solid ground. And for the final question, Maya found a sketch or a drawing in Lily's bag. It showed 3 women in a boat, and underneath, Lily had written the question, Who will save the rower? This made Maya realize she was the rower, exhausting herself to save everyone else while ignoring her own needs. How did you do? If you got those right, fantastic job. And even if you didn't, don't worry. Listening to stories like this is the best way to improve. If you found this story helpful and want to practice your English with more stories like this one, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. Keep practicing, keep reading, and I will see you in the next video.